Greetings, greetings, greetings. This is Joanne Richard Goff saying welcome to episode 8 of CREWShall Conversations. CREWShall Conversations is a production of the KW magazine, CREWShall Connections in Faith and Culture. Yes? And we are here today with Professor Rupert Lewis, erudite, Garveyite, and author. But before we get into the conversation, hallelujah, the second attempt to go live today, and I'm really excited about this conversation. There is so much that I'm waiting to hear revealed. But before we get into it, you need to invite your friends and invite your family and your neighbors and anyone that you think would benefit from this crucial conversation. So I'm going to play the theme song and give us all, myself included, some time to share this video. Okay, here we go. Theme song begins.
We worship Him, come make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come make we worship Him. Come make we worship Him. Come make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come make we worship Him. Come make we worship Him. Come make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come make we worship Him. Come make we worship Him. Come make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come make we worship Him. Come make we worship Him. Come make we dance and sing. Give thanks and praise to the King of Kings. Come make we worship Him. Come make we worship Him. Come make we dance and sing.
Okay. All right. So we are now ready to get into the conversation. If you are in the room, if you are watching us live, or if you're watching us on the replay, please just put where you are watching from, where you're viewing from, so that we can know who is with us in the room. Inside the room, along with Professor Lewis, we have Janice Wilson, who you will remember was one of our interviewees a few weeks ago. And we have Rosie McClegan-Hines. Both of them will be interfacing with you on Facebook so that we will be on the inside and knowing who is there and knowing what your questions are, what your comments are. And of course, we have Mebunano's husband, who is responsible for making sure that the lighting is right and the setting is right and that in pray over me and all of these wonderful things. So yes, we are here to talk about, to give some reflections on the Garveyism and the church. Are you ready? So I want to introduce Professor Rupert Lewis. Welcome, Professor. It is so good to have you. You have given your entire life to making sure that other people know details about the life and teaching of Marcus Garvey and the movement that he started. Yes, so let me Yes, as I said earlier, erudite, Garveyite, and author, known to many as Professor Emeritus at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in Jamaica. And we have some very crucial questions for Professor Lewis. Today, we have Filbert. Welcome, Filbert Needham, watching from Orlando, Florida, on our Facebook page. So, Professor, we actually, let me see if we have the right view there. I want to make sure that we are seeing Professor Lewis. All right, wonderful.
Well, I'm seeing you.
You're seeing me, I'm seeing you.
Very
this
well.
is great. Now, the last crucial conversation that we had was to do with reparation, and it was with Reverend Dr. Stephen Jennings. And one of the things we discovered about Reverend Jennings was that he was the son of a Baptist minister. So I don't know if we're starting a tradition here of interviewing people who are sons of Baptist ministers. But when I interviewed you for the magazine, for the KW magazine, you shared with me that you are also the son of a Baptist minister. What can you tell us about your years of growing up as the son of a Baptist minister in Portland, no less? Some would argue the best parish in Jamaica.
Yes, I think that, first of all, I must thank you for having me on the program. And I look forward to our conversation. Growing up in the 1950s as the son of a Baptist pastor was a very intriguing and exciting time. Largely because my father, who was educated at Calabar Theological College in the 1930s, was influenced by the labor movement of 1938. All of the young people, young ministers in training at that time. And he went to college pretty late in his 30s. That was a shaping experience because we were then preparing Black clergymen because the Baptist church had been dominated by ministers out of Britain. And his generation was a generation that was trained to take over. So I recall the name.
You're saying, pause one moment, Baptist ministers out of Britain, meaning Caucasian ministers out of
Yes,
Britain.
yes.
Okay.
The Jamaican Baptists, of which I'm a part, was created by the British missionaries.
Yes.
So that when my father went to Port Antonio, I think he was then had a stint as chairman of the Jamaica Baptist Union. Wow. So he was leading the fraternity. And he succeeded a British Baptist minister by the name of Reverend Bastable. Now, Bastable is not a name that you can associate with anybody in Jamaica except an English person. Okay. So his role was to take over the ministry in Portland. And what struck me was the effort he put into nation building in the church. Because very often you look at the political side of nation building, but the theological, the ministry side of nation building was a distinct area of helping to frame a nation. And through the ministry, he was associated, married to my mother, who was a musician. She played the organ. She was a teacher of music at Titchfield High School. She did work in Moortown as a teacher, living in Moortown.
And pause one moment again, sir, because some persons in our audience may not know that Moortown is a Maroon community.
Yes.
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 So
she lived and taught in Moortown. Again, this is part of the teacher's role in nation building, because literacy, numeracy, those are requirements for any modern community. So she gave of her time in that. She also taught at Titchfield High School. So this is now the 1950s. So this is before independence. And I mentioned 38. Between 38 and the 1950s, thousands of Jamaicans in each of the parishes that we have were involved in forms of voluntary work. Giving back to communities. There was a national movement in Jamaica.
Yes.
And that movement is a movement of people. It's not a movement of political parties. It's what people are prepared to do in their communities. In terms of the historical record, we are familiar with the work that was done by the Jamaica Welfare League that was started by Norman Manley. Before he was invited by O.T. Fairclough to form the People's National Party. And we are aware of the work of Bustamante in the trade union movement. And I see those initiatives as part of a wider community activism that was taking place. And this expressed itself in the building of churches. My father rebuilt the Port Antonio Baptist Church.
Okay.
And I saw that being done in the 50s on the basis of the church membership actually building the church.
By hand.
Right? By hand. And that is something that I saw. So it wasn't a question of it being contracted out and workmen coming in and you're raising money. They are raising money, but they're also providing voluntary work all the time. And that has left an indelible impression on me. I also saw a similar thing that was done in Drapers, where he built that church that is in Drapers and in Fellowship. Right? So that is my experience of what it meant to participate in the framing of a nation.
So what I hear you saying too was that being Baptist in those days meant being a nation builder.
Yes, this is
taken as a part of, and I mean, I'm saying being Baptist, but then for you all, what it perhaps meant was that being Christian, being people, followers of Jesus Christ, meant that you were building the nation.
Yes. And one of the interesting things is that you started out with your music. And the group that I was very much privileged to hear was the Frats Quintet.
Okay.
They brought down the Frats Quintet from East Queen Street Baptist Church, led by a man called J.J. Williams, who lived until about 100.
104.
Yeah, exactly.
He
Well,
just
JJ in that time was half that age. He was in his 40s. So the performance of music using Jamaican created music was a part of that worship that took place in the church. So it was, whilst we did the traditional hymns, there was also a huge effort to represent ourselves through the spirituals, which they did, and through Jamaican music. And that again stuck with me as part of what it meant to reinvent ourselves culturally through our creativity in terms of the music that was performed. Of course, we did the traditional things, hymns and so on. My mother was very good at that. But there's also this sense that we had now as a people, not simply to copy what we had gotten from the British, but you needed to create your own music of worship. And that was a part of what we did. And my mother was also involved in the festival movement, in training people in the festival movement. And she taught Noel Dexter, who blessed memory at Titchfield. So that is that's why I regard them as being, and there are many people like that in our parish and in our island who are on the ground doing the work that's necessary for us to have a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of self, and helping us to develop our capabilities.
Sir, you're pulling me out now, you know, because you've gone along a road that you know is my baby.
I know.
You know that this is my passion, the whole thing of culturally relevant expressions of worship. And you know I have a list of questions to ask you. But then you go and throw this in here. I want to just make comments of people who are watching online now. Well, earlier on, Marcel Goff had said, thank you for your work, Prof. And,
thank you, Marcel.
And when you mentioned Portland, Janice, who is in the room with us, said, it is the best parish too. She met her husband there, you see. So of course it's the best parish. And WB Hero is watching from Florida. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Make sure invite your friends. It is not too late because we're just beginning to go in. Vonnie Jane says, blessings, thank you, Prof. I suspect you may have taught him. And I don't know. I know he was a student at UTC. And Marcel is saying, them history is treasure to be shared and built on. And Rosie is just saying, wow. And that was in response to just some of what you were saying about your mother taught Noel Dexter. I mean, we know what Noel Dexter has done for Jamaica and all of these things, and really want to know what has happened along the way. You know, Rosie is saying we have so many heroes who we have not identified. You know, yes, we do try to recognize some people on National Heroes Day, which was Monday gone. Then we give awards and this kind of a thing, but there are so many more, you know, and your parents are clearly among them. So we really, I mean, we need to continue that conversation. We need to continue that conversation, but let us press on. Let us press on now. You actually got into talking about how your parents influenced you, but I'm wondering particularly with regard to your focus, your life focus on Marcus Garvey. How did your parents influence you in that direction in any way?
Well, I am told by a close friend of the family that my mother used to speak about Marcus Garvey.
Yes.
But I cannot recall that. So I have to take his evidence for it.
How old, I'm sorry, how old were you when you started researching and about Garvey?
when I was in 1964, when I was a teenager, I was just about to leave Calabar High School. And 1964 is significant because that was a year that Garvey's body was returned to Jamaica.
Okay.
And there was a huge discussion prior to his reinterment in what was then Georgia 6 Memorial Park, now National Heroes Park.
Okay.
And it is in that ferment that I decided that I would study and really find out more about Garvey.
Yes.
By that time, my parents had died. My mother died when I was 10 and my father when I was 15. So they were out of the picture just prior to Jamaica securing independence. But Jamaica securing independence and the decision to reinter Garvey's remains in Jamaica, particularly in the light of the fact that Kwame Nkrumah had indicated an interest that he wanted Garvey to be buried in Ghana.
Oh.
That was one of the factors that compelled the Jamaican government at the time to act, because I think whilst I would like him to, whilst I recognize him as a great Pan-Africanist, I think this is a place that he should have his final rest.
Yes.
And the family agreed to that. Amy Jakes Garvey, who is still alive, agreed to that. And hence, again, I met her, I went to visit her in the late 60s when I was a student at the University of West Indies. And that was the most important influence on me, because I was in touch with the person who was not only married to Marcus Garvey, the man, but I would argue married to the movement even more than the man. And that's an important distinction, because when the man dies, her work continued for 33 years.
Yes.
Now, if she was only married to the man, when he died, it would have ended.
Yes.
But she, as was the case with so many women in the movement, really provided the information and the inspiration for future generations to understand. And she did this in a number of ways. One, between 1923 and 1925, she edited Philosophy and Opinions.
Right.
And in 1963.
Pause one moment. What he's talking about is a book, a critical, crucial book called The Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. If you haven't read it yet, now is a good time to look it up. Okay, go ahead,
and
Larry.
Since we're talking about this, that's also where you find an excellent essay relevant to our discussion that Garvey did in 1922, entitled Jesus Christ, the Great Reformer.
Yes.
And I want to refer to that text later on.
Okay.
But Amy Jakes also wrote in 1963, Garvey and Garveyism, which is a record of her own experience and her own recollection of the movement.
Yes.
The other thing that was important is that there were streams of visitors who came to see her from the United States, from Cuba, from Panama, from Costa Rica. So people would make a pilgrimage to interview her, to speak with her. And it was a period when there were far more people out of Central America returning to Jamaica, people who had gone to meet relatives, the grandchildren really of the generation that had built the Panama Canal. Those were the grandchildren who
Right.
were maturing in the 60s. So you're able, through contact with her, to be in touch with a wider movement of people whose parents and they themselves, in some cases, now well up in age, who had the experience of being in a movement in which Amy Jakes Garvey in her 20s had played an important part. So it's one thing to read books, but it's another thing to be engaged with people who have had the experience. And of course, to share with her in her small living room on the Mona Road, the lovely sculptures. There's a famous African-American sculptor called Augustus Savage, who did a wonderful portrait of Garvey, which was there in her living room. And some of the things from her New York residence, which she had been able to retrieve and which gave us an understanding of what it had been like to be part of the movement. And finally, her scrapbooks of her articles from the 1920s and memorabilia of other kinds that made my understanding of the Garvey movement as close to that period as I could be by virtue of my connection with Amy Jakes Garvey.
Yes. So now we've really connected with a question I had planned on asking about the highlights of your time living with Amy Jakes Garvey from 1979, was it? 69.
No, from 1969 to
69 to 73, 69 to 73. I remember thinking that I was in my heyday at primary school.
Yes, yes.
Those were my primary school heydays, but you were having influences on your life that would impact everyone because then, I mean, you started writing and your writings will long outlive you. I don't know how much you have written about that period of time and just what you learned from it. But what I'm going to tell you now is that the things we are hearing from you now, many of us, if not all of us, have never heard many of these things before. And so it is mind-blowing. I mean, when you said, and this is probably general knowledge, that Nkrumah, that they wanted to bury Marcus Garvey in Ghana. And I smiled and shook my head because I said, well, you never see smoke without fire. No, I see the lights. I see what happened because now we are still, had we been first in saying, we want to bury him here, he is ours. Maybe now we would be more engaged with who he was and what he did in the world. People online, we've got Errol Bean saying greetings.
Okay, greetings.
Greetings, the original Mr. Bean. Philbert Needham is saying Professor Lewis left Calabar High the year that he entered. He said he remembers seeing your name on the honor list in the chapel. He doesn't remember what scholarship you received. And yes, Rosie is saying sharing with Mrs. Garvey, with Amy Jakes Garvey, must be such a priceless memory. Priceless memory. And King Blessing is following from Lusaka all the way in Zambia. Okay. Yes. Thank you for being here. Blessing. So we're moving along now. In the third issue of the KW magazine. Oh, and by the way, people wanted to see what the opinions, philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey look like. Yes, my husband brought it and put it in my hand and said, show the people them what the book look like. This is it. Okay, And then, so in the third issue of the KW magazine, Crucial Connections in Faith and Culture, is where we had that interview with you. And you said, let me quote you properly, that the church is in need of refreshing so that the young people can find and anchor themselves. Tell me, what are the signs that you see that caused you to make that comment?
Well, we're living in a time of crisis and upheaval globally, and even when I did that interview, it was pre-COVID. So we didn't have the
That's right.
anxieties of the present moment.
Yes.
Notwithstanding, I think that the involvement of young people within the church, and especially our women within the church,
Yes.
is a vital matter, because the church, in my view, has had a long history of patriarchy.
Yes.
And patriarchy simply means the assumption of male domination in how things are thought about and how things are executed. And we have that tradition. And I think that for the church to be able to respond both to the spiritual side, which is the most important side, and Garvey mentions that in his the reference I gave from First Opinions to the Jesus Christ, the greatest reformer, as well as to the physical side, because Garvey separates the two. He says that God is really concerned with our spiritual relationship with him. That is what he emphasizes.
Yes.
And he argues that we have the responsibility for our physical material side. And he uses the crucifixion of Christ to say that God gave us his son. The ultimate sacrifice was the destruction of his human self, his physical self. And it is therefore that spiritual bond with God that we need to have a focus on. I think that African people, Black people, need to revisit the Garvey theological legacies. These legacies have been schematically presented by the Reverend George Alexander Maguire. And online, people can read the Universal Negro Catechism. Yes. And let me just quote from this catechism, where it's in a question and answer format. And it says, mention a verse in the Bible in which a person of Black color was proud of the fact. Answer, I am Black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem. Solomon's Song 1 verse 15. Question, explain the connection. Shalomith, daughter of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, betrothed to King Solomon, thus described herself to her Jewish rivals. Question, how do the best Black scholars translate the words mentioned above? Answer, I am dark and comely. It seems that white translators use but in preference to and to create the impression that one who is dark is not expected to be comely. So I just use this quotation from the catechism to show the level of detail in interpretation. Because you're involved in language, you're involved in how we interpret what things mean, why a simple word dark but comely is replaced by dark and comely, and the different worlds that the and the but imply. So I feel that Garvey's the theology ought to be part, the theology within the Garvey movement ought to be a part of what we teach in theological colleges. The material is there on the theology in the movement. It's a theology also which is based not only on Christianity, because there are millions of Africans who are of Islamic faith. So in Africa, you have to deal with that belief system as well. But the focus in the African Orthodox Church and in Garvey's sermons, particularly his Jamaican sermons, which are still unpublished, there is a lot that our theologians have to work with, because what he's enabled us to understand is the richness of our presence in the Bible.
Yes.
If we read the Bible in a disconnected way where we can't see ourselves and we're not really understanding the word of God as it was developed and presented at the time in which Christ was lived, at the time when the disciples took the word out. So this is a very strong part of it, and it connects to a point that we need to appreciate. Jamaica experienced 307 years of British colonial and slave rule. And in that context, we all know of the economic side, of the political side, but there was a spiritual malformation that colonialism created. And by spiritual malformation, the images and the symbols within the church were symbols that rejected Blackness and promoted whiteness. And this is part of the subconscious attitude, subconscious value system. So the movement, why I always go back to that generation that Garvey represented, I go back to it because it is extremely well documented. It has the guidance for us in terms of our relationship with God and our relationship with ourselves, or fellow human beings. Let me just quote a section here. Again, the question, what did Jesus Christ teach as the essential principle of true religion? Answer, the universal brotherhood of man grows out of the universal fatherhood of God.
Yes.
How did Jesus Christ, I mean, again, that is the universalism, which is a part of the way Garvey presented himself and presented the movement.
Yes.
How did Jesus Christ summarize the 10 commandments which were given to the world by Moses? Answer, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang the law and the prophets. You had posed a question of incompatibility, but I wanted to.
Yeah, well, I haven't even publicly posed that question. But
I wanted to
so let me
begin with compatibility first.
Yes.
Because if you don't understand compatibility and you begin with incompatibility, you begin with a dissonance.
Yes.
So I didn't want to begin with a dissonance. I wanted to begin with what are the fundamentals of the Christian gospel
Right.
was summarized in the Universal Negro Catechism.
Yes. So, so the question I had was planning on asking, as you just said, was what are there any elements, even though you do not speak as a theologian, but you were able to articulate what are were the theological underpinnings of Garvey's movement, because it has been documented, as you say. And I was wondering, is there anything there that is incompatible with the teachings of the church? And you say you wanted to start with what is compatible, and you've outlined all of that very well. The thing about it, though, the reason I pose that question is that I have noticed uh, an opposition, some strong, some subtle opposition to even the mention of Marcus Garvey's name among the people of God, among the church. And so I figured it must be that they believe that there is something that is unbiblical in Garvey's teachings and philosophies, why they reject him out of hand like that. I mean, I was warned. I was warned by someone even to be careful about how I focus on Marcus Garvey in this issue of the KW magazine that you were interviewed for. So why do you think then that people are so opposed to Marcus Garvey's teachings and philosophies?
Well, I would think that Marcus Garvey has been the target of a sustained campaign of denigration, a sustained campaign that he was a thief.
Yes.
A campaign that seeks to take him off whatever pedestal he has been put on. And I mentioned the 307 years of British rule, in that he had sharp debates with British Baptist ministers, one of whom was the Reverend Ernest Price, founder of Calabar High School, over the issue of slavery emancipation and the role of Britain in our system. Garvey argued, as Price was arguing, for example, that, it is the missionaries who provided who struggled and who provided the ideas for the end of slavery, and Christianity was a mechanism for the
abolition.
free. Garvey responded to him quite clearly, say, you people are the ones who imposed slavery and the transatlantic trade on us. But they wanted to present a view of Garvey's message for the redemption of Africa as being not the path that we should take, but we should continue under British rule, British hegemony, British charity. So we have inherited a legacy that is hostile to the assertiveness of a Black identity. It's there in the church and it's there in the wider society. And when you assert a Black identity, it is seen as challenging the status quo. I think there is that dimension to people being cautious, feeling threatened. And I'm glad they're feeling threatened, because if there are things that we need to get rid of in order to fully appreciate the value of the legacy. It's not only of Garvey, but it's of a particular generation of people that came up 100 years ago and developed a global movement that had impact Africa, US, Europe, what have you. A movement of the kind that has not been seen since then. So the mobilization to undermine that message, even his theological message. I mean, serious people will have to engage not with the hearsay, but with the actual texts, the writings, the speeches, the catechism, how they set out the belief system with respect to Christianity. That is when we can begin to get serious. But other than that, you can't base yourself on hearsay. I think also that another factor is that people are afraid of Rastafari, because Rastafari, that the movement from the 30s had been the movement in Jamaica that has been behind the recognition of Marcus Garvey. So you have that other factor to reckon with.
Yes, that is true, because, I have heard that people would think that I am going in that direction.
Yes.
If I speak about Marcus Garvey, I see some comments coming in. I see Rosie saying oppressors set out, organized to paint a bad picture of him. I think he was mashing up them dolly house. And she also says, I honestly didn't think of him as a Christian, but a godly person, more as a freedom fighter. I have not read the material, and I suspect that most people have not. It's merely been hearsay. So people, growing up, we never thought of Marcus Garvey as being Christian. So I am going to encourage people to go and seek out the material. As a matter of fact, we have a devotional article in the magazine. And for this particular issue, I was, looking to see who do I ask to write the devotional for that one. And, eventually I went and lifted something from Marcus Garvey's writings himself. So he is the one who did the devotional, and it was powerful, and it was clear, and it was biblical. So we need to do our research again and not listen to what was fed to us coming down through the years. Marcel is saying he was Christian to the bone.
Yes.
To the bone. Yes. See, Professor is agreeing with Marcel on that. He was Christian to the bone. I have not seen anything to tell me otherwise. Philbert Needham says, how far have we come from the days when Hugh Shearer's government banned Walter Rodney? What a thing. No, that question I am going to ask you to see if you can answer after. I'm looking at the time, this is what I'm looking up there at. Because I know we are supposed to end at 2. But so I'm going to the last thing that I want to pose. Can you give us 3 action points for the church arising from Garvey's teachings that could help the church in Jamaica to find herself and lead Jamaica out of this place where we are doubting ourselves, and losing our sense of self.
Mhm.
3 action points. What can we do?
Yes, I think losing our sense of self, um, losing also our sense of agency.
Yeah.
That is to say, our ability to affect what is happening around us. And these reaction points, some of which I've mentioned already, and I'll repeat.
Mhm.
I think we need to have a spiritual kinship with God. This
Yeah.
was the point that Garvey made. And we also need to take responsibility for how our society, how our island is run. We have to be able to participate more in the fundamentals of the way the island of Jamaica is run.
Okay.
It cannot be left up to the state. But I think following on Garvey's work, that spiritual relationship with God
Yeah.
becomes the base on which we function. And this is what he stresses and has stressed in all of his sermons. I think the question of universal brotherhood of man, growing out of the fatherhood of God, it's a biblical conception which guides us in the direction of caring for our fellow human beings,
Yeah.
of not simply being selfish, but reaching out and thinking of and acting in ways consonant with Christian belief.
Yes.
And I would argue also the being proactive in our communities. As I mentioned, one of the things which growing up, which was important to me, was to observe my parents giving their all in the work that they did in the church and in teaching to the community. And the response of the community to us, which was an important indication that people recognized what was being done, and they gave what they had. They shared what they had with us. We have moved that far away from that. But in our communities, being actively engaged with our neighbors and with those in need. And I would add also tolerance for other points of view, being able to listen to people, to understand where they are coming from, and to be able to intervene on the basis of that toleration.
Okay.
Those would be some of the points that I am taking from what I have been saying about Garvey's aspects of Garvey's approach to his relationship with God, his God,
Yes.
our God, and his relationship to the people from whom he comes.
It's so interesting because now it sucks back into what Jesus identified as being the summary of the 10 commandments.
Mhm.
Love God
Mm,
and love your neighbor as you love yourself.
mhm, mhm.
So
Which is tough. It's not easy to do.
it's not easy to do, but once we get that sorted, then everything will fall into place.
Mhm.
You know, just a little pause here to read some of what is being said in the Zoom room. Um, Sister Jones says many reject Garvey because he spoke up for the Black community and the church. No, she says, and the church and the world see Black as nothing, inferior to all. I am really hoping this is not the case. I know this is not the case in every situation, because it sounds like a blanket statement, but I understand where she's coming from. That this is the sensing of many, that the church and the world see Black as nothing, inferior to all. So she says, I'm going to try and find some of his books. And Rosie says, them say Gavin never know him place as a Black man. Them was trying to put him in a place, him too upsy. Thus the bad media by both whites and brainwashed Blacks. But here it is, and welcome Sharon Sams in the house. Here it is that we are seeing that if we were to follow Garvey's teachings, sir, we would actually be following the teachings of Jesus Christ. And it is in that vertical connection that we have the power to establish good horizontal connections and to be his hands and his feet in the earth. You know, it's interesting because the aim of the CREWShall, conversations, the aim of the CREWShall connections in faith and culture of the magazine, KW magazine, is we want to facilitate conversations about worship and cultural identity. And here we are seeing from even this conversation where there is a fraction between those two things among many of us as people of African descent. So it's really facilitating that conversation among people of African descent about worship and cultural identity. And it is because we want to get to know ourselves better. We want to get to know each other better. And we believe that when we do that, when we know who we are, and when we get to understand each other, that we will be able to build more authentic connection with our Creator, you know. But I like the way that you are putting it. It's like it starts with the vertical. It doesn't start with the internal and the horizontal, but that vertical. But you see, the other way I see it is this. If we are to build a relationship with our Creator, we must know who we are. Otherwise, we are going to be building a relationship based on falsehood, based on who somebody else is or who somebody tells us that we ought to be. And so just, I am telling you, this really has been a crucial conversation. I would love for you to attempt an answer to Philbert Needham's question: how far have we come since the day when the government of Jamaica, at that time it was Hugh Shearer, who was the Prime Minister of Jamaica, banned all things Walter Rodney. And some people watching and listening now maybe I've never even heard of Walter Rodney. So if you could give us your views on how far have we come.
Yes, well, briefly, Walter Rodney was a graduate of the University of the West Indies, who had gone to England to study African history and had gained his PhD at age 24. He had written on the Upper Guinea coast and this in the period of the slave trade. And he had taught at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And he was later to write the book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which he's best known for. But in 1968, when he was recruited from Tanzania to Jamaica, Rodney spent a lot of time traveling the country, talking to people in communities, on gully banks, in schools, in churches, and talking about African history and talking about, you know, people's lives and how those lives could best be improved. But the government of the day was afraid of the Black Power movement.
Yeah.
It's a Black country, Black majority country. And they banned the writings of Malcolm X. They banned the writings of Stokely Carmichael. Mrs. Garvey, Emeritus Garvey, was one of the protesters in October 1968, standing on her gate whilst the students walked past, cheering them on.
Okay.
Because she said it was a shame that the government should ban Black writers, Black literature. And this was because the reason, again, goes back to the same reason why people disrespected Garvey.
Yeah.
Enlightenment came from Garvey. Enlightenment was coming from Walter Rodney, another generation. What he was saying in Jamaica, in Kingston, was published in a small booklet called Groundings with My Brothers.
Yeah.
And what was the content of these groundings? Survey of African history, before colonialism, before slavery. The assertion that Africa had been the basis for world civilization and had spread out through the north of Africa to southern Europe and so on. And we were there before the Greeks. He was giving that. He was also a critic of the way the independence had been, the new governments were governing in independence. So Rodney was seen as someone who was going to upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
And when he was banned from re-entering Jamaica on October 15th, 1968, the students at UA, University of West Indies, organized, protested.
Yeah.
Little did we know that so many people would have joined the demonstration. And little did we know that there would be such mayhem in the afternoon of that day, because people were venting all of their frustrations in that massive demonstration that took place. I was part of the organization of the students. I had no idea
The truth
it would
will
have
out.
accumulated such a mass support. But Rodney had been in all parts of Kingston, in the communities. Wherever people would invite him, he would go. He had been in Brownstown with D.K. Duncan and others, who was a young dentist at the time in Brownstown. Had just come back from McGill University a couple of years. I went with Rodney to Claudius Henry in Clarendon, who had this big enterprise there and was part of the movement of the time among Rastafari, but with a community-based structure and with a business structure run by his wife, Mrs. Fisher, who was a fisherwoman. So there were movements all over, which we did not realize that these reasonings would have provoked this anger. So you don't know when a movement will arise or begin in response to an injustice that people see and an awareness that an injustice is being done. Because Rodney was not the first person to be banned. People were banned from going to Cuba. I had lecturers who were studying Cuban literature who were banned. But it did not create the seizure of their passports and so on, did not create any ripples. But somehow the Rodney issue created ripples. Now the question asked is, how far have we gone from that? I think we have gone very far from those days with respect to the acceptance of Black literature and people's access to them. But what has not fundamentally changed are the relations of power in Jamaican society between the mass of the population and the business and political elite. Some changes have taken place, but that relationship has not fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
And that is one of the challenges that Jamaica faces, because it needs to be a more democratic society. And by this, I mean more democratic with respect to its economics, how its people live, and more democratic with respect to our willingness and ability to participate in the fundamental decisions governing our lives.
Wow. All right. This is, I don't even know what to say. I'm going to have to go back through and watch this and have watch parties so that people can watch it with me to just perhaps even take notes. Not perhaps even, I need to take note of all that has been said. I'm sure there are things revealed here that many people didn't know. And so we are helping people to make that connection, that crucial connection that needs to be made so that we can know who we are and whose we are and what is our purpose. I want to also pause at this moment as we are looking at wrapping up to give a special shout out to our brothers and sisters in Nigeria
Thank you.
who are, yes, going through a struggle. Yes, people in my background are saying we want a part 2, we want more. This was really just, and people online are saying it's eye-opening indeed. But yes, we have been following that struggle in Nigeria, and we are with you in prayer, praying for love and unity. Love and unity, because it's one love, is one blood, right? So let us not forget. And you see, this is why we are here, so that we can connect with each other right around the world. There's no reason, there's nothing really, no barrier, because of technology and the internet. Here we are, and thank God for the people who created Zoom, and there are other platforms as well where people are making crucial connections and having crucial conversations. I don't know if there are any other questions out there. What do you think? Do you think we need a part 2, people? Should we prevail upon the professor for a part 2 to going deeper on some aspect of what he has said? You can just, give us a message, send us a message in our inbox if you would like that. I'm looking here to see. Rosie is saying such things cannot only be in a book, because we are not a reading people. And this is why Crucial Conversations is here, because we have the magazine, and people, yes, you are able to acquire the PDF version online. Let me just put a link to the store inside here so that you can know where to get the PDF version of the magazine. If Rosie or Janice could just post it inside the Facebook page, so that those of you who are readers, and I would encourage us all to become readers, because there's so much valuable information and opinions that are locked up inside books. And if we don't read them, they remain locked up, and generations to come will suffer as a result of that. So it is now 2:14, Professor. We are grateful to you for not just living, but sharing what you have learned in your walk from losing your parents when you were very young, but paying attention to who they were and what they contributed before they passed. And, you know, living with Amy Jakes Garvey and all that you learned there and reading all the books and doing all the research. Marcel Goff is saying, thank you, Prof. Keep up your honest, great work. And Marjorie Newsam says, yes, part 2 would be appreciated. Marcel is encouraging people to visit Liberty Hall. It could be a life changer for you just to get in-depth knowledge of who Marcus Garvey was and what he did, not just for Jamaica, but for people of African descent all over the world. And Joan is asking, when are we going to investigate Garvey's biblical beliefs in the church? When are we in the church going to investigate Garvey's biblical beliefs? That's a good question, Joan. And yes, Philbert is saying yes to part 2. Errol Bean is saying yes to part 2. We will speak off air, Professor. Maybe George is saying yes to okay, we'll speak off air to see what your schedule is, because I know you're very busy and you have been going on a long journey. It must be painful sometimes for you to see how Jamaica named Garvey as the first national hero, and yet Garvey is directing us this way and we are going that way. It must be painful. All these years, for over 50 years, you were an educator and you must have been so influencing people along the way. But so we are here to encourage you. We do want more, and we don't want to just be people of talk, but we want to be people of action. Anyway, I am ready now to close off. People, those of you who are on Facebook, if you go on the KW magazine page, Crucial Connections in Faith and Culture, KW magazine, Crucial Connections in Faith and Culture, you will see a button that says sign up. If you sign up there, you will be getting updates on what we are doing next, on when the next issue of the magazine will be out, how you can be involved. We even are looking for people to advertise in the next issue, and we need those ads because that is what pays the designers and the publishers. So if you have something that you would like to associate with this work, then inbox us, please, and let us know if you want to contribute to this work. All right, I don't know. I beg God to bless them and keep them. I beg him to smile upon them. I beg him to show him love even though you not deserve it. And you beg him to look upon him and go to feel peace today and tomorrow and the next day until he come back. What good and one love.
One love, one love.